And it's a good afternoon to the Sportsfan Radio panel. And Judge, during the week, you sent me an email in respect to James Hird and him getting an interview with the Essendon coaching selection panel. And would you like to take us through the reasons that you thought it was timely to have a discussion about that?
Thanks, Mark. It's now 10 years since the so-called Essendon drugs saga, and what a saga it was. James Hird, being objective outsider to Essendon, look at this Essendon thing and look at James Hird. And Mike Sheen called him one of the 20 greatest players of all time. He had a good coaching career. He's at just under 50% when he coached. For the 3 years back in the day, in 2015, has done a lot since, has been involved in the game since, has done a lot outside of the game in terms of his business or businesses. He's gone overseas to study. I think highly rated by the general football community. And yet, despite what we always say about redemption, it seems that whenever there's mention of James Hird coaching back at Essendon, it all brings back the 2012 saga again, and what a kerfuffle that was, which it was. And I just think it's ridiculous. And all the commentary, whenever it focuses on should he get the job, should he not, always goes back to that time. And I think it's redundant. I think that time has passed. One of my favourite quotes, Professor, is Heraclitus, Greek philosopher, said, "A man never steps in the same river twice. A man steps in a river, 2 years later he steps in the same river. Well, he's not the same man. The river is not the same." Without getting too philosophical about it, James Hird has changed. I suspect he wouldn't even put his hand up unless he felt that he had the wherewithal to coach them to where they want to go. But I'm just getting a little bit bemused, and if I was an Essendon supporter, sick of the focus on James Hird always being about the drugs scandal. I don't know whether he's the best person for the job, but that to me ought to be the focus of the inquiry or the interview, rather than what happened back in 2012.
John, question for you. Not conspiracy theory or anything like that, but has this got Kevin Sheedy's fingerprints all over it? A favourite player of his returning to the club. James Hird has never taken any responsibility for the drug saga. He said, even though he's coach of the club, this was done without me and I didn't know all about it. If you want to put your head in the sand and believe that, well, that's good luck to you. You'll never go anywhere. But this has just got Sheedy's planning, changing sides on the board. I'm behind you. No, I'm behind you now. And, we'll bring him back to the club. I think, as we're talking off air, for the 17 other clubs in the league, it'd be fantastic.
It's hard to know. I mean, I don't know what's on the background, Gelding, but the reality is that everybody in Essendon has got a very strong opinion on James Hird, and because everybody has a strong opinion, the feeling seems to be, well, he'll be controversial if he comes on board. I don't think so. He comes on board, there'll be a massive change around the place. There's no question about that. And I tend to think that change is usually a good thing. They start winning a few games, all this will be forgotten. He will be judged entirely on on the team's performance, and whether he's not been in the system as much as, say, Adam Uze. Well, that's true. But then, has he got the gravitas? Has he got the leadership abilities? Has he got the intelligence, the emotional intelligence, the football nous? Well, I don't think that some say the game's moved on a bit. Well, I see the Voss his co-Brownlow winner, seems to be doing pretty well. They're contemporaries. I don't think you lose the essential skills that made you a great coach in the first place. And although it's going back a few years, Ron Barassi certainly showed that when he came back to North Melbourne.
But is he actually a good coach? I don't get this. I actually don't know if he can coach. So, like, go through the process like everyone else. Now, you talk about Kevin Sheedy. Mark Robinson's also a fairly big fan of James Hird, I believe.
What the James Hird spokesman?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen.
Or media manager, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen a James Hird article for maybe a day. So,
yeah.
Robbo might be focusing on actual football. I'm not sure. But can he actually coach? This is what I don't understand, Judge, is that we're all talking about him and he's put his hat in the ring, but can he coach?
Well, that is the essential question, Coutta. And you and I read probably the same stuff. We don't know because nobody's bothering to actually analyse his abilities as a coach and what it actually takes. You see, my thought, I've said this before, these days a coach is more of a manager of coaches. There's so many bloody coaches at football clubs these days. You're sort of the puppet master. But ultimately, there's an X factor that I think makes a great coach. You look at the great coaches over the years, I won't repeat them, but they're those that have got just that X factor, and maybe he's got it, maybe Uze or Brad Scott don't have it. I don't know. I'm not so involved, but the problem is, Coutta, we don't know because all the media focuses on is the James Hird enigma.
If we start talking about coaches that have been appointed over the last 12 to 24 months, Voss you've mentioned already, but I think the greatest example was last night and the actual giving a bloke a chance and someone that's done their apprenticeship, and I'm sure he was overlooked for coaching roles and coached at Richmond reserves and went on their assistant coaching panels and all this sort of stuff. Now, if he's not the greatest breath of fresh air around coaches, and I don't know what it is, but they've given him a chance. GWS have now gone, do you know what? We've seen probably what McRae's done to Collingwood. They've now gone and recruited Adam Kingsley, who, again, is from the Hardwick. He's done his apprenticeship. He's been looked over for numerous roles. So they've got him in. Now, all this talk about Hird, as you said, is just taking away from the actual panel or the actual coaches that they've approached. So Solomon, Uze, Brad Scott should not get the job. And then you've also got the Hird. So, the other thing is the panel that they assembled to actually come up with the coach, like Robert Walls, like the Paddle Pop Lion, like I'm just surprised that like these people, they seem to gravitate. And it's like Lee Matthews and Mick Malthouse and Kevin Sheedy, and you go through a whole list of them. Football's moved past these people.
Yep.
Like we're still hearing from them. They're still Rex Hunt. Throw Rex Hunt into that list. Now they're fast becoming irrelevant. So isn't it time that we start giving chances and opportunities? And if it is recycling coaches, guess what? So be it.
Coutta, I think you've hit a very good point, and I was going to bring up the Collingwood example. But the big figures of Collingwood in Eddie Maguire and Buckley, they were always saying they're commenting. Yeah, they were always in the papers, not the players. And all of a sudden, you get this pressure. As you said, clear all that out the headline takers, if you could call them that. And just say, hey, bring this in. Look how he's opened up and freed the players, and the players don't feel that pressure and they're performing well. Any side that goes from 17th to a top 4 position has done extremely well. He would have got an excellent pass mark if they finished 9th. Buckley coached them into a position of they were scared, they were a negative side. This guy's freed them up. Hird, Sheedy, they're not playing for Essendon anymore. But believe me, if they appoint Hurd, they'll be the ones all in the press. You know, it won't be about the players.
Yeah. Coutta, sport. The world is run by idiots, and so is sport. I reckon the biggest idiot is the president. He comes in, he's been there 2 weeks, sacks Robson. Then he says, the first thing he says is, we'll get a new coach. We won't want an untried person. We'll get a tried person. So straight away, you Craig McRae's out of the equation because he wouldn't get the job under that analysis. Then all of the really good coaches, the existing coaches, they've got jobs. And those that aren't nailed down either aren't any good or looking at Essendon like Ross Lyon saying, you've got to be joking. They're just a rabble. And who wants to coach a club where you've got the sword of Damocles over your head all the time, like the last poor bastard they just got rid of? So straight away, just in one sentence, he basically, I think, crueled them to getting just about nobody. And that's why James Hurd comes into the frame.
Well, and Gelding, you would have seen the announcement that Ben Rutton's returned back to Richmond now.
Yeah.
He's gone from Richmond to coach Essendon. He's now gone back to Richmond. I think that speaks volumes for what Richmond see in this particular person and Ben Rutton. Now, if you want to talk about the way press is handled and the like, Ben Rutton's a prime example of the way that he handled himself during the whole season. But then the back end, and Essendon will say that that's the coach, he didn't coach well, et cetera, but who came out smelling really good out of all this? It's not the new president. It's not the previous president. It's not the board of Essendon. It's actually Ben Rutton.
Yeah.
And if you go back to like the president or the president of Essendon, Dave Barham, who's supposedly, again, a good operator who's got the ultra respect of everyone within the football industry because he's a good football person. He was embarrassing. Like Clarkson didn't say it, but 4 days they gave to try and appoint a coach or to try and woo him. That's just reeks of arrogance, doesn't it?
Well,
stupidity.
That's Essendon, though, isn't it? They think they can just buy whatever they want.
So
and it was that was the Collingwood mantra for a while. And look where it got them. You know, the best thing about the Collingwood thing was Malthouse to Buckley. Well, that wrecked them for 10 years, which is good. Essendon think they can do whatever they want. Hopefully this wrecks them for another 10 years.
Well, of course, there's no CEO in place at the moment either. So there's no CEO.
Yep.
So, and I think they did an internal review. They're now doing an external review. At the end of the day, people get pointed to reviews, and we talked about the St Kilda one the other week with Grant Thomas. On-field performance was horrible. At the end of the day, that's a footy club, isn't it, Professor?
I still think it's got Kevin Sheedy's fingerprints all over it. He's been manipulating boards there at Essendon for 20-odd years when he was coach, you know, saying, I'm going to go to Sydney, I'm going back to Richmond, you know, if you don't appoint me again for longer. And, yeah, I don't know. It just seems messy. It seems a divided club. And, yeah, I'm with you. If they go for an experienced coach, everyone they've asked that had any substance is saying no.
Well, gentlemen, I'll put it to you this way. What I say is it's got more to do with the environment than the person. Because if you look at Ben Rutton had a very good pedigree to be appointed as a coach, similar to Craig McRae. He'd done his time at Richmond and at other teams before that. Richmond had been very successful while he was there. He gets taken out of the successful Richmond environment and put into an environment like Essendon, and he doesn't have success, or he has limited success, and there's greater expectation. Now, doesn't that have more to do with the environment that the person's surrounded by? And I'll take it one further. Alistair Clarkson's been very successful, but what about if he's not successful at North Melbourne? Because they've got a similar environment, let's face it, to Essendon. Have a look at their last 5 to 6 years. Been very, very bad. Gelding, Richmond have been the recipient of one of their trades. We played in your back line this year and made it a lot steadier, I thought, and probably will go around next year.
Yep.
Melbourne got a premiership full forward out of it. So for me, it is more about the environment that the actual good coach might go into, which dictates that they won't have success.
And let us forget, not forget, Professor Alistair Clarkson, after a couple of years, was going to be sacked by Jeff Kennett. Were Alistair Clarkson to go before the Essendon coaching role, and after a year or two didn't succeed, he'd have been out, which means that Essendon are going to be on a hair trigger, I think, to want success very quickly. That just won't come. The most equally successful AFL club of all time, 16 premierships. I can't see a premiership coming in 20 years to Essendon.
They do quote the 16 premierships all the time, and
all the time, yeah.
I think that they're up to 6,800 days since they won a final, and again, Melbourne should accept responsibility for that. I think, Professor, if you go back to your comment though, is that Melbourne were a shambles until they got Peter Jackson in. At the same time, the board leaks, or the phone that used to go straight to the journalists stopped. Now, Essendon, with their board, like you read about them in the paper more than their on-field performances nearly. So they need to tighten up the board. They need to actually shut shop and go, right, we're going to do this. This is what we want to be. We want to be successful. Richmond did the same thing. They appointed Peggy O'Neill as the president. They then got Benny Gale as the CEO. They then got Neil Baum as football manager, and they created this stability. There's no stability at the clubs that are struggling, and North Melbourne's another example.
That's an excellent point, Coutta, you make, because if you have a look at it, the strategic appointment for Melbourne wasn't the coach.
No.
Peter Jackson.
It was the CEO. Now, we're hearing a lot about who's going to coach Essendon. I went through the papers this morning. Over the last 2 weeks, there's absolutely no comment about who might be in the running for the CEO at Essendon. And let's face it, from our discussions, that's probably a more important appointment at the moment than the coach. How come we haven't heard about who's been appointed to make that appointment?
And Professor, Essendon have been no good since Peter Jackson left Essendon to go to Melbourne to steady the ship there.
And Professor, of course, Peter Jackson is doing some work at North Melbourne Footy Club. So, yeah, he did an amazing job with us, and we'll be biased here, at the Demons, and he changed the culture.
And isn't that what's needed here? Essendon need to change a little bit of the culture to get it right.
Well, I think what they need to do is they need to appoint someone that's not Essendon as well.
Well, that's heard out then.
Well, but isn't that the thing? Isn't it this boys' club? I don't get it.
Gentlemen, just a question for you. If they go through this process and they're also interviewing experienced senior assistant coaches, how does the president come out and say we're appointing a new coach that has had no prior experience when, you know, they said when he dramatically took over, we will pick an experienced coach and only have an experienced coach? We've
all got short memories, Gelding. People forget that, and there'll be a 5-minute kerfuffle, and they'll just move on. But I'll tell you what, Professor, you raise a good point about what I perhaps sexistly would call the soft power of women in football, but I think it's starting to make a genuine difference. Not just the AFLW, but I think behind the scenes in football, we're seeing a bit of a, hate the word revolution, but certainly a grassroots movement away from what Coutta's calling the boys' club of the AFL towards a more reasoned, less testosterone-driven approach we're seeing with the women in power in football. I think it's an interesting development. We perhaps talk about another time some more.
Well, the Bulldogs president is being highly touted or reported, and she's someone that was considered or still is for the head AFL role, Judge. So yeah, it's certainly.
Well, Judge, you make a good point there. Like the last 5-6 premierships, there've been women presidents apart from the West Coast one.
Yeah.
So one last thing, Judge. it was reported during the week that Zach Merritt, at a function that he was speaking at, was asked about the Essendon coaching position, and bearing in mind he's the vice captain of the club, elected to say that Hurd wouldn't be his preferred choice as coach, but if he was appointed, they'd make it work. Now, surely that says something about the culture where the vice captain feels the freedom to put his two penneth in about a decision that's not his.
Yeah, but it's also an ambiguous statement. I mean, all it says is it's not my personal preference. And of course, as I said before, everybody regarding James Hurd has got a very strong opinion. That's his. But I do think that if he did get the job, I'm not saying he will, if he did get the job, I've got no doubt, because footballers can't help themselves, they're professionals, that they'll get behind him.
Who would you appoint, John? I know you haven't had the benefit of listening to people's presentations, but out of Hurd, Adam Uze, Dean Solomon, Brendan Lade, where would you be looking?
I'm unashamed. I'm a fan of James Hurd. I think he's one of the best footballers I've ever seen, one of the most courageous players I've ever seen, and one of the best football brains I've ever seen. And the way he used to get his players around him, I think he's a very good manager, and he's a legend of that place. And look, perhaps I'm getting carried away with him, but I also, plus Joe Watson, I think, was diddled out of a Brownlow medal. I think that whole thing's still got legs to go, Professor. I think that anyway, that's the drag saga. But basically, I think he'd be a very good coach of Essendon Football Club.
Gelding, who would you appoint?
Oh, look, Adam Uze seems to be the one in waiting, doesn't he? And probably the next cab off the rank. He's done a pretty good apprenticeship, been involved in a premiership at Melbourne. So, yeah, I'd probably go Adam Uze.
What about you, Coutta?
I think either Uze or Lade. They've done great apprenticeships at good clubs under good people. So I think one of those two. But yeah, we're just guessing. We haven't seen the PowerPoint presentations, and no doubt they've all been impressive and the like. But yeah, I would think either Uze or Lade for me. And then they're going to bring something different. I think that's the thing, different ears and that. So yeah, one of those two.
Okay. Still waiting on Paul to join us, so I might throw this one in.
Oh, Professor, just before you do, I have spoken to some passionate Essendon supporters who we know, especially Chris, formerly of Barwon Heads, now of Geelong. There does
a former contributor to the program.
Yes, there does seem a lot of support within the core membership of Essendon for James Hurd. So, but as John said, it can be fairly divisive. You're either firmly with him or firmly against it. But I think the majority of the membership, or the majority of Essendon supporters that I know, are in favour of him returning, thinking that he didn't get the full opportunity last time.
All right, Gelding, before we go to Paul Dalligan, I might stay with you. Yesterday's racing at Caulfield, we mentioned in That's Racing that it was the usual show day meeting.
Yes, the one Jeff Kennett took office.
That's right. Now, Flemington on a Sunday, that is very unusual.
Yeah, I don't know what's the thing behind it. The prize money seems to be a bit more than midweek, Professor. For a couple of races, $75,000 for the Oaks and the Derby previews. Yeah, it's just an odd meeting. Sundays traditionally, of course, is, as we well know, country, and a lot of secondary country cups are on a Sunday. So as you come to them, but yeah, rather strange. And see, this week, of course, you're going to have apart from Flemington on Caulfield on a Saturday, Flemington today, Friday night you're going to have Moonee Valley. Then you're not having a race meeting in the city on the Saturday. I'll go down to Mornington. And then Sunday, again, a big meeting at Flemington. So, yeah, look, next week I understand because of the grand final. This meeting just seems to be stuck in there to give these horses a chance probably to qualify, you know, for the derbies and the Oaks. So, will be interesting. But, of course, anticipation of rain. It's a soft 6 at the moment. If it gets hit with any rain, it may just be, you know, a bad meeting with a lot of scratching. So, yeah.
I've just done an update, Gelding, on the computer. They've just had a recent review of the track. It's now a heavy 8.
A heavy 8. Okay. Well, probably what it should have been after the rain yesterday. And if it gets...
Isn't that drop the mic sort of conditions, Gelding?
I tend to think so, David, but the trainer has an alternative view to the owner.
Don't mention the war, Coutta.
And of course, Gelding, yesterday was just a great day for the battlers in the Blue
Army.
Cummings had an okay day across 2 states, I think.
Well, David, you're an avid listener of That's Racing, and
I try to.
Yeah, and you know, we've had some nice results because of it. But as we say, the Blue Army, I certainly like following the Blue Army because they have so many horses. They place them in the right races. You know, they've got the champion Animo up there, but you know, ingratiating yesterday. This is a horse that's been placed in the Blue Diamond, but it's just running in a restricted race. Now, someone like me that would have one horse or a share of a one horse rather than that, you know, you'd be setting this horse for group races, hoping that you could pick it up. Whereas they, you know, put it in a right race till 1100. Zapato's a good horse, but it's in its right race when it wins. They might have another beauty in F Cabin winning by 6 lengths. It won very, very well. But they did the same in Sydney. You know, you had Animo and you had plenty of other winners. Briganton in the last, Elgron in race 9. So they've got these horses and they put them in the right type of races. And yeah, that's why they're so successful.
And the winner
you won't go broke. You won't go broke following the Blue Army.
No, well, they're in it for a reason.
Yeah.
And the winner of the last in Melbourne, ingratiating yesterday, Gelding, got a bit nervous with the grandstand, so decided he'd go to the fence and then wobbled out again towards the members. And geez, it didn't want to go straight,
easy, didn't it?
Didn't want to go straight
around the turn. It came around the turn about 5-6 wide, and you could just see this horse was just yards above the opposition, and it won easy. Yes, it drifted back to the fence, but it won pretty easy with a, 58.5. It was top weight. So,
and Gelding, while we're talking about the war,
$9 too.
And while we're talking about the war, can we talk about your racing club, please? And what's happening with the inside track and Sandown, and obviously it's no bakery; they've got rid of that.
Yes. Are you talking the Melbourne Racing Club, or as famously Dr. Turf used to call them when they were the BATC, Dr. Turf was very famously calling them the very amateur turf club. And they've obviously continued in that way. As a member there, a 30-year plus member, they haven't listened to the members since the day dot, and they're currently off doing their own thing. Did anyone want an inner track at Caulfield? No. Did the committee, in their worldly wisdom of past successes, go ahead and do that? No. The CEO saying, we've got to expand our business. Well, the Melbourne Racing Club doesn't it tell you what your business is? You're racing. You're not a pub owner. They want to own pubs. They got to do this. And a lot of this goes back to the days of an old chairman in Mike Simons and that, who wanted to control the world, wanted to change the agenda so he could be Putin and be leader for life. But look, we just look there. We've just brought tickets for the Caulfield Cup over. We're down in the barrels of the grandstand and paying $180 and that. If you want to actually see the races, in their tiered dining area, fork out $600 $500 to $600 a ticket. They're just getting away. We're not going to Caulfield Guineas this year. I can watch them on TV, go and get a dozen oysters, some cray, and still be in front of what Melbourne Racing Club will charge us. So,
all right, Gelding, we might hold it up there.
I was enjoying that. Thanks, Professor.
Yeah, I know you were, Coutta. I know you were. But let's move on. All right, given that it's a heavy 8 at Flemington today, Gelding, and there are showers predicted, so the track might still get downgraded from a heavy 8. What are your best bets for this afternoon's meeting?
Yes, Professor, as we said this morning when I was studying the form, we're certainly looking for wet trackers. So we'll go with the up-and-coming stayer in the first race 1, number 11, Port Phillip. Again, trained by Julius Sandu down at Cranbourne and ridden by Jamie Mott. This horse has won its last 2. After they brought it from a dispersal sale from Lloyd Williams. This was originally a Lloyd Williams horse that they offloaded and picked up. And, of course, it's showing a fair bit of ability now. But Lloyd Williams after the Group 1 winners. So hopefully that wins the first. Then go to race 4, number 6, Cardinal Gem Professor. Graham Begg train. Lockie McNeil claiming 3, bringing it in from 61 to 58 on the wet track. It's 1 in the wet. Last 5 starts are 2, 4, 1, 2 and 3, Professor. So it's been thereabouts and hopefully he can win today. And then we'll go. Gay Waterhouse has brought 1 down for the Victorian Derby preview. We'll go race 6, number 1, Major Bill, Professor. Horse that's had 4 starts for 1 win and 3 placings.
All right, Gelding, thanks for that. And I see that Paul Dalligan has joined us from beautiful Sydney. Good afternoon, Paul.
Afternoon, Professor and panel.
Now, Paul, semi-final, we'll do the men's semi-final review first. Friday night, the Raiders ran into a buzzsaw. The Eels 40, the Raiders 4. I'm sure Ricky Stewart didn't see it going like that, but Brad Arthur was very happy at the end.
It was interesting in the lead-up. There was some talk that there was some issues at the Eels. One of those dreaded reports had been prepared suggesting there might be some nepotism at the club and factions, which is never good.
Well, that's never good. We've lost Paul. We might.
It's a nice profile photo for him.
Yeah, he's
Did Ricky? Was he unhappy with the refereeing? Was he unhappy with the scheduling?
No.
Was he okay with the loss? Was he, Professor?
Yes. He put it like this: we weren't good enough. We only had 35 to 40% of the ball, and you can't do anything if that's how much of the ball you've got. He did say that at one stage during the season they were 15th, and if they had have asked him would he be playing in a second semi, he would have said no. So he said he'd take that any day. Did you see the match, Coutta?
Yeah, they were far too good. Parramatta. They opened them up pretty early, went to the flanks, and they were way too good. So no, probably no surprise at the end of the day. I think that the week before, Canberra just got over the line of the Melbourne Storm. line against the Melbourne Storm. And I think both teams were pretty bashed up after that. It was a physical encounter. And unfortunately for the Raiders, their pack, that's obviously been one of their major factors, the dominant, probably wasn't at their sharpest the other night. So, yeah, Parramatta far too good. But, yeah, Canberra certainly to finish in the top sort of 6 now that they've been eliminated, I would think they would deem that a success considering where they'd come from, as you said, injuries. And Ricky, I think, was quoted that if they didn't have the injuries they had in the first half of the season, they're probably finishing top 4.
Professor, can I just have a segue from the Coutta about Parramatta and what we were discussing last week with the success of AFL football in Sydney? Parramatta recently had a survey done in the town of the most favourite sports. Guess where AFL football came in? I'll tell you, 27th. I didn't know there were 27 sports. They must play curling in Parramatta to be able, or darts, or call darts a sport, or chess. But that sort of gives you some idea of how wonderfully the GWS concept and AFL football in Sydney is going generally, because that's a sport heartland, Parramatta. They know their sport, they love their sport, and AFL is 27th. I just reckon that's a big FU to AFL.
The other
was
side
watching in front of watching finish in front of the AFL, did it, John?
Everything would have been.
They were saying last night, Professor, that the victory for the Sydney Swans will assist the Giants, and I'm sort of thinking that's the longest bow you could possibly draw. It won't even assist them, but we've got Paul back. He looks as though he's sitting on a throne.
No, I've had to change positions here. Sorry, gents, not a lot of reception. So I am in the bathroom, not on the throne.
Paul, we were just talking about the Eels and the Raiders. The highlight for me was emerging star Xavier Savage's try. You'd go a long way to see a better try than that.
Well, there is a lot of talent at the Raiders, and I was saying last week, there's always that team with momentum, whether it's American sports, because they've been playing every week like a grand final, but they came up against a great Eels team, but that's not underplaying what got them to where they were, which they were hundreds to one, would have been literally hundreds to one to make that position. So they should be proud of some things, and there's certainly some good signs ahead for next year for the Raiders if Ricky Stewart can just keep his head from exploding.
They'll be selling a lot of fireworks they would have sold a lot of fireworks in Fishwick, I would have thought, Paul.
And other things, yeah. Well, they've got to watch some other things next weekend instead of watching the Raiders on TV. But you got to remember the Eels, I think, have one of the longer droughts in Australian sports history. So we're almost talking St Kilda levels. It's been a long time since the Eels have tasted glory. So they used to be great when I was a kid. They haven't done much since. So I think the Eels are due. I actually think they're a big chance of beating the Cowboys.
All right, Paul, last night's game would have been very close to your heart. The Rabbitohs really serving it up to the Sharks. The Sharks out in straight sets now. That's got to be a surprise.
Well, given where I'm staying is in the Cronulla area as we speak, I elected not to go to a local pub in my Rabbitohs regalia because I prefer not to be in a coma. I wouldn't be able to do the show from a coma. So,
what suburb's that? What suburb's a coma?
The Shire.
No, I'm in the middle of the Shire here. So I actually have seen quite a few Rabbitohs jerseys around. If I did that when I was younger, I would have been punched in the head. So you would have been very brave to show any other colours years ago. So perhaps it's changing around here. But the Sharks, we just, forgive me for this terrible pun, but we blew them out of the water, the Sharks. It was an absolute demolition job. And I think the Rabbitohs are very overpriced against Penrith next week. Penrith are a good team, but wow, the Rabbitohs had stars at every corner.
Dare I say, Paul, it's one of the few times a rabbit would maul a shark.
Well, there you go. I think the Sharks might have jumped the shark, but they'll be back next year, the Sharks. Don't worry about that. But their coach has done what we all hate and got stuck into his players. I think words to the effect of you.
Well,
I know who they are. He's gone after some of the players. He hasn't named them.
Professor, I watched the game last night and they were very impressive, the Rabbitohs. But a different opposition coming up against Penrith, I suppose, this week, who will do that. But could the Rabbitohs in Mitchell, who they say is one of their strengths, could he also be one of their weaknesses because of the, at any moment he seems to be the ticking time bomb that could go off on the rail and just seems to do the little things that just seem to, annoy other players and referees and that.
It's a tough one there, Gelding, with Latrell Mitchell, we were talking about, who's the full back who could play centre as well.
Yeah.
One of the criticisms with him, Gelding, is really around the fact that sometimes he does get caught up emotionally in the game. He gets vexed. But the other thing with him is he may not touch the ball enough times when he's sitting at fullback. And when he touches the ball, normally good things happen. So with him, Dylan Walker, they've got the half in who's one of the best
Cody.
defensive halves in Elias, who's come on leaps and bounds. They've got Cook, who's the hooker. So they've got some strength in the key areas that we always used to identify with the Melbourne Storm, which was Slater, Cronk, Smith, and there was one more. I've missed one there for sure. But they've got key strengths in that. So they might dish it up to Penrith on, is that Friday or Saturday night, Professor? Question without nose. And then
Panthers Rabbitohs on Saturday night.
Saturday night. So that'll be an absolute cracker. And hopefully the night before in Townsville, where you've got North Queensland Cowboys taking on the Eels. That has the potential as well. So both games, you would hope, would be close.
Penrith back again, sir.
Penrith had the chance to blow teams away, though, and that's probably the biggest risk.
And Professor,
you had a question?
Professor, in my endeavour to be helpful to Paul Flegman, Coutta is an Indian reservation in New Mexico. So what he was worried about was being belted so hard, he'd end up about 4,000 miles away. So he must have been worried.
Yeah. No, I thought it might have been a suburb in Sydney. That was all I was worried about.
Probably should be.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, it should be like last night's game was good. As you said, the Rabbitohs got a hold of them pretty early, and the game was really a bit of a no contest. And I think the other thing last night as well, Professor, was that the Sharks players, some of them, probably didn't live up to their reputations or the like. So he hasn't named them, but I wouldn't have thought Nico Hines would say that he had a good night as the playmaker. And that's the first time really he's had to drive a team in finals playing at the 7 rather than at fullback there, or the utility role that he played at the Melbourne Storm. And he'll be better for it. He's a terrific young kid.
Yeah, just looking at Paul's feed.
Jesus.
I was going to say we've got roving Brian.
I've gone out onto the front lawn here. I tell you what, deep in the heart of the show. But I've got to say, if you had told me that the three most probably intense coaches in the NRL with Fitzgibbon, you've got Bellamy and also
Ricky
Trent Robinson, that neither of them would be in the top 4, I would have been very stunned. So that is a real surprise. I'm not saying that that's the end of that style of coaching, but they certainly are incredibly intense, those three coaches. And
oh my goodness! Wasn't Scott Morrison the Prime Minister and somehow involved with the NBN? Has that not made its way?
It's good to see our tax dollars helping Paul get to air today, isn't it?
Hey boys, can we raise the book? The next time he'll be in the bloody he'll be in the Sydney Harbour.
No, he'll be at Northies with the.
He'll be on the stand.
All right, look, gentlemen, we might
Sharks players.
We'll see if Paul can get a better signal. But what I wanted to talk about, I sent you the agenda and talk about Caitlin Moran, the Indigenous Newcastle Knights star, who went to social media to comment on the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Let me tell you, she was banned for a match, which when there's only 5 matches in the season is a tough penalty all by itself, but also to lose 25% of her contract wages for the season. and to have Ray Hadley say it's perhaps the most reprehensible thing I've ever seen connected to rugby league. Well, let me comment on that. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant male living in the past to make a comment like that, I just think it's outrageous the way she's been treated.
I've got to say, Ray Hadley's not someone I look to for advice, input, or anything at all, because I'd rather listen to someone who's actually makes sense. You've got to see the hypocrisy in this. It's the same guy that with the 7 for the rainbow round, you've got to allow free speech. I don't agree with what was said. When you compare it what was said at an Irish football match, that they're sung Lizzie's in a box, I don't think that it's quite as bad as that type chant. But I think that the penalty is way out of line for the offence, particularly given what some rugby league players have done. And you've got all sorts of things. I mean, there's some shocking, not just drugs, but we've got sexual abuse, and it's you're entitled to your point of view. You don't have to be a monarchist. You probably said it wrong. But I just think the penalty was way out of line for the offence.
Well, Paul,
it was a dumb thing to say.
It was.
Well,
but
And
if you want to compare, if you want to call it the most reprehensible thing in rugby league history, that's a brain explosion. He's lost the plot. Someone should check
Paul,
on Ray Hadley. It's not.
If you actually take a shock jock's view of something, that says something just to get comment, and again, really, did he have to weigh in on it?
No, there's things he could have weighed in on, like, as I said, abusive partners, players' wives, players' partners. You've got drug abuse. You've got simulating sex acts on dogs. You've got blokes simulating drinking their own urine at a urinal. I mean, things like that. I mean, all of that. It's you're not going to put it.
And the AFL's got Wayne Carey every time. Professor, if ever I thought that this ought to be taken to court, she ought to take it to court, because seriously, otherwise there's no such thing as free speech in this country. It's about the dumbest thing I've heard said for a long time, but people are entitled to say dumb things. And gee, if you want to go through social media and say you're going to get pinged that penalty for dumb things, bloody hell,
yeah.
I'll be lining up from here to Brisbane for their penalties.
Well, yeah, Judge. And Paul, tell me this. If we compare this issue with the deferred penalty for Taylor May that we discussed last week in great detail, how do these two things sit together?
No, and also I can't remember Ray Hadley being too critical of Israel Folau's views back at the time when he came out with his biblical quotation banning most people from getting anywhere near the gates of heaven. So I do think he needs some semblance of consistency. But as you say, Taylor May, that involved physical harm to someone as opposed to someone airing their political views. So, I certainly think that they're not on all fours.
And
there was a gentleman called Jared something, wasn't there, Giraffe?
There was what?
Who ended up inside. Yeah, there's been a lot worse things than that.
Oh, Jared, I Have a Dream. Yeah. Thought he was in a scene out of Twilight. Turned into a vampire. That's the sort of thing that should be reprehensible and viewed as such. Yeah.
Peaches and cream.
Yep.
Now, Paul, if we look at the NRLW round 5, that suspension is specifically going to affect the late game today. The Dragons, who are third, take the Knights on, who are second. Now, that's basically playing for second spot on the ladder. That's a huge blow to the Knights, losing Moran for that game today. How do you see it's a very exciting finish, actually, because I just did the sums. Do you know the Eels are on the bottom of the ladder, haven't won a game, but there's a scenario that the Eels can make the finals if they win and other results go their way, yet they're up to round 5 and they haven't won a game.
Well, they're 151 to 1, Professor, if you want to get that as to your parlay. That could be your superannuation fund parlay if you put them in. But I do agree with you. I also go back to the Taylor May that Peter V'landys came out and said it's all for the fans. So if you're interested in the fans of the NRLW, you'd want that player playing because she's a World Cup player. And as you say, that could play a big part in what happens in the finals. They're playing the Dragons, very even match this afternoon, the Knights. And the Knights are one of two teams that won 3 out of 4, and the Dragons having won all 4. So it is unfortunate. If you're worried about the fans, Peter V'landys, perhaps you shouldn't have these type penalties, or at least apply them consistently.
All right, so terrific for NRLW today. There's a triple header on the Central Coast. The first game's already kicked off, Titans against the Roosters. I'll anticipate that you haven't seen the score so far. So who do you think will win that one and why?
Wrong game, Professor.
What's that?
He might have gone a bit late. It's a bit of that game might be after this, isn't it?
Yeah, the Broncos and Eels kicked off at midday, but I haven't been following here.
14 to 6. 14 to 6, Professor.
Okay,
the Broncos?
No. The first leg of my multi is looking very ordinary.
So the Eels are doing well.
Yes, they are, unfortunately.
Well, they still.
I was
they
just
still
about to
could
tip
get
the
up.
Eels. Is there a big chance today at $3? So there you go. I'll say it now. The Eels are a big chance, listeners, at $3 if you can get it.
All right.
It's good luck trying to get it when they're in the lead.
All right,
$1.10 now of the ING odds.
Now, Coutta, is the next game the Titans against the Roosters? Would I be right in saying that?
You're all over it, Professor. Well done.
Who'll win that one and why, Paul?
I think because that's their chance of making the top 4 and getting ahead of the Broncos. Remember the Titans, Professor. You will if they win at $3.20. Remember the Titans.
Okay, and the late game is the big one. Dragons v Knights for second spot.
Well, Dragons now, given the turmoil at the Knights, I think she's such a big player there, despite her social media frenetic activity, that the Dragons should win that and bring some joy to that St George area, which is a very fine rugby league area, as is Newcastle, which is a shame all this fuss about. Be nice to have some fuss about their team, which is doing very well, as opposed to the men's team. But, of course, all the newspaper headlines have been about this dog act, excuse the pun.
All right, Paul, NRL, 2 big preliminary finals coming up. Friday night, the Cowboys playing the Eels. Cowboys get the week off and home field advantage. Can the Eels overcome all of that to make the grand final?
I think they can, but history and stats are against me, which isn't the first time. I think 7 out of 8 and 10 out of 12 teams who've had the week off have won. So if you want to follow those stats, you'd put the Cowboys in as specials. But I actually think the Eels with Dylan Brown, Mitchell Moses, Clint Gutherson, I just think that Cowboys may have overachieved. I actually think the Eels will win. And I'll lead into the next game. I think that my Rabbitohs might cause a monster boil over. And an Eels-Rabbitohs grand final would be up there with the Bombers and Hawks grand final, if you want to put it in AFL terms. They would come out of everywhere.
And so, final score for Panthers Rabbitohs?
Oh, I really just can't. It's like, no, it's all just almost beyond me. I won't be able to sit still that game. I'll be walking around like a death row inmate, but I think we'll win 22-18, the Rabbitohs, and you'll hear me from there.
And what about Cowboys Eels?
I think the Eels will win that one. Another high-scoring game in the tropics. When it's so hot, defence seems to drop off a bit. So I think it might be 28-22, the Eels.
So you've gone for both the outsiders.
There you go. Why not finish with in a crazy year, another crazy year? A couple of crazy tips for you.
All right, Coutta. Let's finish off with Davis Cup. Didn't even realise it was being played until this week, and yet Australia could finish top of their group if they beat Germany.
Davis Cup, as it's now known. It should change its name, Professor. It's been sold to some soccer player. It's currently being played in Europe at 4 different venues. Australia's playing, I think they were playing in Hamburg, I think. Again, really excited by it. So they're currently 4 pools, and one's Bologna, which is in Italy. So Italy's hosting. You've got Valencia, which is obviously Spain, and Spain's in that group. And then you've got Germany, Hamburg, and then you've got the Great Britain, which is in Glasgow. So what it is it's a round robin four pools round robin. Top two go through and play in the quarterfinals and semis, and then the actual final. Now, the reason for this or changing the format originally was to try and encourage the top world players to participate. Well, that's what we thought it was always about, Professor, because they wouldn't play Davis Cup. Now, this tournament, you've got some of the world's top players, but you don't have all the world's top players. There's another tournament being played at the moment as well. So the Davis Cup very fast becoming irrelevant. If it's not already irrelevant, and I would say it probably is. Australia's on top of their pool, played Germany undefeated, who are also undefeated. Both those teams will go through. They're already locked in. Excuse me. And representing Australia, we've sort of brought out the big guns. We've had Jason Kubler play, who's done very well this year. Alex Demonar, who we've talked about last week. And then you've got Ebden and Purcell. And that's our team.
Coutta, how does the Davis Cup so-called? I totally agree with you. Back in the day, the Davis Cup, for instance, was much bigger than, say, the Ryder Cup. Well, look at those two tournaments now. But how does the Davis Cup, as so-called now, line up with the Laver Cup?
Oh, wow. Gee, that's... the Laver Cup, don't they all want to play that?
Well, Federer's retirement is going to be with the Laver Cup. I see that the seats, to get a seat, they're now selling for $40,000. I don't think you'd be selling Davis Cup tickets for $40,000 for a seat.
Well, the stands have been fairly empty, so I don't think you'd have any issues getting a seat.
It is really sad, I think.
The other thing is that they've taken it away from 5 sets. It's now the best of 3. So, no, certainly it's a shadow of what it used to be. There's no home and away ties, which I think was always one of the highlights of the tournament, or if you want to call it a tournament, but the home and away ties where they were banging drums, and unfortunately for Australia, we had the Fanatics. So we were never going to win any competitions with those mugs supporting us. Embarrassing, actually. But yeah, I don't see, why would you just not get rid of it? Like, it's no good. Just get rid of it. The players, obviously, I don't think they want to play it by the looks of it. You've got Yannick Sinner, who's playing for Italy. You've got Great Britain, who had Norrie, who's ranked 8 in the world, playing. The Americans have got Tommy Paul, Fritz, Jack Stock. England, or Great Britain, I should say, because they're playing Great Britain, plays Davis Cup judge, not their individual nations. Andy Murray's played the doubles, so they're actually haven't qualified either. So I don't know. I just think that it's pretty irrelevant, especially on the back of the US Open. Like straight after the US Open, like who wants to play it within a week of the US Open?
Yeah.
Like I think it's just let's just get rid of it, start again, and maybe don't sell it. Pretty simple.
Is it better for being privatised, Coutta?
I wouldn't have thought so.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have thought so. No.
My comment about it was, who cares?
Oh, no one really. Do they? Does anyone care?
I think the Spanish footballer who bought the thing probably does.
Oh, yeah. Probably wants something for his investment, doesn't he?
Yeah.
All right. Might finish quickly, Coutta, on this one. You and I both checked out Daisy Pearce's comments about the AFLW cutting the minute silence for the Queen because it was Indigenous round. What an eloquent spokesperson for the AFLW.
She is. I just think AFLW, but also what about AFL? Like Australian rules football, I would have thought. Isn't she just a wonderful ambassador for the whole sport? I still think she gets a bit of a rough steer at times in the media, whether that's commentary and this rubbish this year about her and Carey and whatever it was about the commentary, and then people are backing Carey, and that was just rubbish. Like, that should never have happened. But her comments about the AFLW around Indigenous round, the minute silence for the Queen, she's educated herself on it. And ignore what Tony Shaw's commentary around her was embarrassing. And again, a reason why Tony Shaw should probably be going and watching his son play at Greensborough, or the like, because he's so out of touch with it. And he'll say he's entitled to his opinion, but he's in the media. He should know better. And she was brilliant. Like, she's just a fantastic person for our sport. And that's what I'll say at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it clarified for people who aren't particularly paying attention why it would be a problem for Indigenous people to be giving a minute's silence.
Yeah, and she said it well. It wasn't like it was imagine if we'd had Dermot or someone else delivering it, we'd still be here listening to them very succinctly. And I thought, as you said, Professor, clarified the position that they've taken.
Yeah, and then makes it totally understandable as to why these things happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, spot on. I totally agree with you.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thanks very much for your participation today. Much appreciated as always. And until next Sunday, have a good afternoon.
Thanks, boys.
Go Casey.
Thanks.